In the early 1900s, immigrants poured into the central Toronto neighborhood known as the Ward. They came to escape from Eastern Europe's pogroms, Italy's economic difficulties, and the hardships they faced in Poland, Germany, Russia, and China. The newcomers were immediately met with slum houses, sweatshop factories, and unsanitary living conditions. The Ward District was the infamous slum district of its day. Bounded by College, Queen, Yonge, and University, it is recognizable today for such landmarks as the Eaton Centre, City Hall, and Bay Street. Before the neighborhood was developed, families crowded into the same room, working men labored for 60 hours per week, and 1 in 5 children died before they reached the age of 1.
Obviously, changes were badly needed. The key leader behind the establishment of social services in early Toronto was John Joseph Kelso, an immigrant from Ireland who had experienced poverty himself growing up in Toronto. Later, as a crime reporter, then newspaper editor for The Globe, he had written in the 1880s about the hardships faced by poor children, the sick, the aged, and the newcomer to Toronto. Kelso was appointed superintendent for dependent and neglected children and invited by Premier Sir Oliver Mowat to administer the Children's Protective Act, passed in the Ontario Legislature in 1893. Kelso had studied earlier examples of settlement work in London, England, and in Chicago, and was convinced of the value of a neighborhood settlement house for those living in the downtown Toronto slums. Kelso wrote,
I was greatly impressed with the value of the Neighbourhood Settlement House as a preventive and corrective social agency and as an inspirational centre for the residents of the district. From then on, I was determined to bring about settlement work in Toronto, but it was not easy to demonstrate the need.
Indeed. William Lyon Mackenzie King, while Deputy Minister of Labour, favoured religious zeal over ethical passion and felt it improper and premature to promote the settlement movement in Toronto or anywhere else in Canada. Settlements set up on a religious foundation were still favoured. Reverend E.B. Horn, in his report to the Special Committee of Knox College, articulated this.
The social settlement seeks to harmonize and civilize. This is good, but it is not enough for our purposes. We must seek also definitely to Christianize. We are going into this work not merely inspired by a thin, sentimental humanism, but also a positive, definite, aggressive, evangelistic propaganda.
Influenced by the politics of the day, Kelso put off this dream until he was approached by Arthur Burnett and George Bryce early in 1911.
Divinity students from Victoria University were sent into the ward to survey the religious condition and outlook of the people and to urge them to attend Methodist revival meetings in Massey Hall. One of the students, Arthur H. Burnett, photographed his findings and reported on a state of moral and religious destitution past all belief and unsanitary conditions of the most horrible kind. Burnett took it upon himself to raise awareness of the poor living conditions he had observed in the slums. He held a series of lectures accompanied by lantern slides of his ward photographs, where he advocated the establishment of social settlements. Burnett emphasized that a new charity model was needed. Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic organizations could not meet the needs of the predominantly Jewish settlers. Evangelical campaigns further alienated the population they were meant to assist. There were even rival proselytizing meetings held on opposite street corners between Jewish and evangelical missions. While geographically the slum was located in the center of Toronto near City Hall, in many ways it was on the periphery of genteel urban citizens' daily routes. The settlers who prospered moved out of the ward. The Jews moved west towards Spadina, forming Kensington Market, and the Italians moved to college, forming Little Italy. Those that remained faced an uncertain future. In 1911, George P. Bryce, together with Superintendent John Joseph Kelso and divinity student Arthur H. Burnett, founded Central Neighbourhood House, a social settlement that sought to provide incoming Canadians with services they desperately lacked in the downtown Ward neighborhood. The house was to provide them with education, recreation, and cultural activities, and, unlike other missions and social reform movements of the time, the services were to be completely secular in nature. In 1919, a group of young adults and children are seen in a lineup outside the Central Neighbourhood House social settlement in the ward. Ranging in age from children to teens, they represent a cross-section of immigrants that have arrived for a day of programming. Many of them are Slavic and Jewish in origin. Thus, within a few blocks, 5 or 6 languages are spoken and as many different creeds professed. In what was termed an audacious stroke, Elizabeth Neufeld was appointed as head worker of Central Neighbourhood House. As a young Jewish woman from Baltimore, she was fluent in English, Yiddish, German, and Polish. She took up residency within the community and shared in their everyday sorrows and gains during her 4-year term. She advocated for better neighborhood services, obtaining better street lighting, playgrounds, and the use of schools as social centers, making strides in social progress that would set the tone for future directors. A hand-drawn map from the head worker's 1912 annual report shows how Central Neighbourhood House, or CNH for short, was located in the heart of the ward at 84 Gerrard Street West, near the Elizabeth Street School playground, the Young Streetcars, and the Children's Hospital. From the library hour to the Arlington's athletic sports clubs, from folk dancing to monthly concerts and plays, the residents of the ward now had a location to meet and nurture their sense of citizenship and culture. Newsboys, who worked their late afternoon shifts in the city, could now gather once a week in the basement billiard room to rest from their day of hawking papers, also avoiding city lures of petty theft and gambling. Sales and factory girls who finished a long day on the assembly line could now meet once a week to share in sewing and knitting classes, also selecting club leaders to promote independence and leadership. The Boys' Parliament provided the children with an initially rowdy introduction to concepts of citizenship. After dividing their neighborhood into constituencies and electing a parliament, they borrowed money, purchased their baseball uniforms, and levied fines of up to 25 cents for misdemeanors, such as smoking tobacco or using foul language. Less than a year after it had opened, Elizabeth Neufeld's yearbook leaflet summarized CNH's programming achievements. Over 200 children and adults had participated in one of CNH's 34 clubs or activities at 84 Gerrard Street West. CNH sports programming intensified in the late 1920s as hockey teams from diverse Toronto settlement organizations competed for an annual trophy and celebrated their annual achievements with a hockey banquet. In May 1912, parents and friends gathered to watch their children showcase their acquired music, folk, and dance skills at the first Central Neighbourhood House Spring Festival. With the enlisted help of the Parks Department, some 250 geraniums were also distributed among the crowd of neighbors and families. These plants were to be nurtured and returned for judging in the fall. The festival scenes of celebration would have been hard to envision a year earlier, when Arthur Burnett's ward photographs shed light on the realities of ward life and raised awareness of the need for settlement services. Residents also now had options for summer excursions. In 1918, Walter Laidlaw even donated his Lake Simcoe home, the Gables, to provide children and adults with a camp retreat. From post-World War I until as late as 1953, generations of Ward and Cabbagetown residents participated in swimming, hiking, boating, and bonfire activities. A 1920 House publication reported that the camp was attended by
school children, factory hands, salesgirls, truck drivers, printers, newsboys, high school and university students, professional boxers and baseball players, and drifters, as interesting, representative, and promising a group as the ward could produce.
In order to help this diverse population, CNH established a well baby clinic and a milk depot in 1913 that offered free health services, the first advances into public health as they addressed the neighborhood's 20% infant mortality rate. By interceding with city officials, courts, and landlords, they also advocated for the rights of their residents, such as a 1924 case report that outlines how a mother of 6 was released from jail after having stolen 7 milk tickets. In the mainly Anglo-Saxon neighborhood of Cabbagetown, the working class community especially suffered from the effects of the Great Depression and later World War II. In response, CNH moved east in 1929 to 349 Sherburne Street, where, according to a 1943 annual report,
the husbands of many club members, in spite of large families, joined the forces at the outbreak of war because it would mean security for the family. This had a drastic and somewhat bitter effect on the family concerned.
Social unrest fermented in the 1940s and 50s as evidenced by the rise in gang activity. Teens dropped out of high school to join the workforce, becoming entrenched in the neighborhood trap of poverty. According to a 1959 report, 42% of teenagers at CNH had criminal records or were on probation, figures that were also reflected in the Regent Park and Don District neighborhoods' rates of juvenile delinquency. In one instance, the infamous Riverdale Rumble pitted the self-styled Spadina Spooks and Regent Park Regents against the Working Boys' Home for Toronto. CNH also experienced the episode of the broken pianos, when windows and instruments were destroyed by vandals using club cues and billiard balls. Yet, head worker Helen Sutcliffe and staff opted to work directly with the 100 members of the Cabbagetown gangs, providing sports, cultural, and leadership clubs that fostered youth leadership skills in a positive direction. As Cabbagetown became more diversified, Central Neighbourhood House adjusted its programming to allow for the changing immigrant demographics. This ranged from the Chinese Women's Club, one of the first CNH adult clubs, to the more recent Somali Women's Group of the 90s. The Italian Women's Club, which originally met once weekly for tea, continues to meet some 20 years later. Members crossing town with their daughters and granddaughters to maintain the tradition of dancing the tarantella. In 1968, children poured out of the Central Neighbourhood House Sherburne Street location, carrying bricks to solicit funds for building a new home on Ontario Street. While the pace of change in the Regent Park and Cabbagetown neighbourhoods has accelerated, as former executive director Jean Rolls noted in 1971,
the needs haven't changed, but our understanding of how they can be met has matured. In 1970, the fundraising committee, with the help of the community and many donors, raised $700,000 to build the new house at 349 Ontario Street. It was CNH's first purpose-built facility, and it opened on December 5th. There have been modifications and the addition of a rooftop playground over the last 3 decades. The surrounding conditions have changed, but CNH holds steadfast to its original principles of neighbors helping neighbors, offering a safe place to meet and a wide variety of programs to assist those in need. 2011 marked a century of Central Neighbourhood House. The 100th Anniversary Steering Committee was chaired by former Mayor Barbara Hall. They organized an ambitious program of monthly celebrations over the year to commemorate 100 years of Neighbours and the forming of CNH in 1911. It has been a long journey. However, CNH continues to fulfill its mandate to provide the support and services to the people of Toronto that they need in a non-judgmental manner, free from cultural, religious, and even political baggage. The song remains the same. The words, the music, even the tempo have changed, but Central Neighbourhood House is still a centre in the neighbourhood, larger than ever.